Now, we know the development in terms of the software in the EVs and the autonomous driving. China is the leader here. And recently, we had the international standards on test scenarios for autonomous driving systems releasing landmark international standards that were led by China. Give us your response to this in terms of these international standards for driving.
It makes a ton of sense that China's leading the way because almost every vehicle, well, to your point earlier, BYD now has 1 million vehicles with God's eye capabilities, and they've leaned into that by offering to pay for any insurance damage or damage for any vehicle. So the one thing that's really different in the China market than the rest of the markets, primarily the United States, is that the intelligent driving systems are ubiquitous across brands. In the US, it's primarily Tesla, Ford, GM, and to a lesser extent the Lucids and the Rivians. But in China, NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, Xiaomi, they all have their own systems, and so they almost compete against robotaxis.
We're hearing from Baidu and its Apollo Go teaming up with Car Inc. And this is going to be redefining the last mile transportation. They're jointly launching the world's first autonomous driving rental. Now, this is, very curious to me because you could use this instead of hiring a taxi or basically calling an Uber. You can just get an autonomous car to come pick you up. And this is really for short-term rentals, if you will. They're saying for a couple of hours to up to 7 days. How is this going to redefine that last mile transportation?
I think for Baidu, they're sticking their neck out a little bit. I'd like to see the fine print, to see which use cases and when it can and can't be used. But again, it seems like the price war and the competition in the EV sector is bleeding into intelligent driving and robotaxis. And Baidu's leading the way because, first and foremost, they have by far the largest number of robotaxis on the road in China, likely over 1,000. So you had mentioned that Pony wants to get to that 1,000 number. In total, I think there's over 1,500 robotaxis on the road in China. Half of them, more than half of them, I think, are safety driverless as well. So I think if you look at Tesla's launch in Austin with a non-safety driver, safety driver, and then a remote driver as well, you really see the difference between the competition levels in China versus in the United States.
Now, you brought up the price war, so let's talk about that briefly here. We've heard from President Xi Jinping where he's said enterprises have had disorderly low-price competition and this needs to be regulated. How much of a heavy hand are you expecting?
I believe the central government is hopeful that some of the players that are instigating, aka a BYD, is going to dial down some of the competition and the price cuts, but we are also just going to be getting out of summer very soon. And we know that the last 4 or 5 months of every year in the China market is when more than half of the sales happen. So, and if you look at the U7 from Xiaomi just launching, the L90 from Onvo, NIO's brand, and several other, let's say, Model Y killers are launching within the next couple of months, I'm not sure I see an end to this price war through the end of this year. Now, we get into Chinese New Year of 2026, I think maybe we could start to see a little bit of settling of this competition.
Do you think with all that's going on, we have Trump's tariffs on countries, Trump's tariffs on sectors, and then we also have his big, beautiful bill. What is the impact on China's EV sector?
I think, well, so the U.S. market, which is the second largest passenger vehicle market in the world, is already virtually off limits to the Chinese EV makers. Now they need to focus on the EU and try to settle in on what the tariff levels for each of the brands are going to be. But at this point, the tariffs and all the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration, it seems to be noise. and they're just going to focus on business as usual and trying to get closer relationships with the European Union, which is the third largest passenger vehicle market in the world. So if they're able to settle in and find some sort of compromise with the European Union, I think at least for the next 18 months, the Chinese EV makers will just focus more on markets in the EU and in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East.
The market is digesting this 50% tariff on copper. Still waiting for more clarity if there's going to be any exemptions and what type of copper products. But in my reading, I now know that copper is needed in the electric vehicle space. How would these import tariffs going into the United States, 50%, how would it be impacting the EV space?
It will affect a Tesla, a Rivian, and a Lucid disproportionately just because they only sell electric vehicles. Now, with the one big beautiful bill that the Trump administration had passed on July 4th, they're already sabotaging EV growth in the United States. And so my fear is that it doesn't really affect the sector that much because of the one big beautiful bill is already passed. But it does create supply chain challenges for a GM and Ford, who are still trying to grow out not only their sales volume, but also the number of products in the clean energy vehicle space for sale in the United States.